Welcome r/EntitledParents. Entitled Mom says my 7-year isn't allowed to mourn her grandfather anymore. Ruined 7th birthday. My dad died on the winter solstice 2016. We are pagan and celebrate Yule instead of Christmas. It was a very sudden heart attack in his sleep, though I'm not convinced he didn't purposefully overdose and cause it himself. My oldest was 6 at the time, and my dad was her best friend. It hit us all very hard, and I was struggling to help my daughter through her first real loss while mourning myself. My mom decided to self-medicate with crack and whiskey, ironically what my father used to overdose. She kept making promises to my daughter about spending time together. Being 6, she was suddenly terrified that she would lose my mom too, and then bailing last minute. Always to go to a party or hang out at the bar. She said this was her grieving. I said it was her spiraling, but she refused to seek help. Mental stability was not a priority in that household. Ever. Here's where the entitlement comes into play. Less than 2 months after his death, my mom starts dating a new man. By February, she told my 6-year that grandma had a new man friend. She didn't tell me. I got to hear about it through my 6-year's tears. She felt like grandma was replacing Pop. Even if that isn't the case, the relationship was new and the kid was still grieving. She didn't need to know about grandma's new relationship yet. But my mom disagreed. She said she has the right to tell her granddaughter whatever she wanted. We got into heated argument after argument about boundaries and my daughter's right to mourn. My mother said you need to support me on this. I informed her, like she did when I came out of the closet, that no, I don't have to support you, but I do have to accept you. She accused me of demanding she break up with her boyfriend because a child threw a tantrum. I told her she was welcome to live her life, but she didn't need to involve my daughter in every aspect of it. A few months went by of my mother constantly trying to force her new boyfriend into my daughter's life. She would ask to take my daughter somewhere to spend time together. I would ask if her boyfriend would be joining them. I had to turn her down several times. After asking my daughter if she was comfortable enough to get to know him, she was not. Each time my mother would scream at me about ruining her life and impeding on her grief. She was in mourning. How could I treat her this way? My daughter's 7th birthday rolls around and we get ready for a family party held in our backyard. I specifically told my mom that she was invited, but her boyfriend was not. This was a 7-year party. Birthday girl made the guest list, and it is no place for drama. Well, guess what she does? Not only does my mother bring her new boyfriend, oh no. Turns out the poor guy had just had a stroke or something and needed assistance walking. He temporarily needed a walker, and the party was through the grass to the backyard. My mother left her date to fend for himself at the side of the road and strode into the party area with a look of absolute triumph that didn't make sense at first. Then, I saw him come around the corner, a man I didn't recognize and could only be one person. On either side of him were my in-laws, holding his arms to help him along the grass. They didn't know him either, but they saw him struggling in the front yard and decided to help him make it to the backyard. The moment my daughter saw him, she started to sob. Seeing just my mom without my dad was hard on her enough at the moment. Seeing another man in the place where Pop is supposed to be, broke her. She ran inside to her room, and before I could get someone to cover the grill for me, my mom chased after her. I found them in her room, my daughter trying to pull away from my mom, and my mom hugging her tight and muttering in her ear. Something inside me just snapped. I knew that position well. She was being told she is a selfish child for having emotions. I jerked my mom away from my child and pulled her into the other room, where the yelling began. Mom, she needs to learn to get over this. Me, she's 7. Mother, this is hard for her. Mom, you're being so mean to me. I just lost my husband. Me, and she just lost her grandfather. We're all hurting, Mom. I told you he wasn't welcome. She wasn't ready to see him. Mom, well, he's already here, so there's nothing she can do but get over it. Me, you need to leave. Mom, you can't kick me out. Me, this is my house. Now leave. She didn't go quietly. Everyone at that party knew she was thrown out by my own daughter. I'm just here to celebrate with my grandchild. When she was finally gone, I hugged my still sobbing 7-year-old and asked her what grandma said exactly. 7-year-old, she said I can't be sad anymore because he was just my grandpa, but he was her husband. So I can't be sadder than grandma. My stomach churned, and I was suddenly very sorry I didn't pop my mother across the face before she left. Edit. We did go no contact for nearly a year, and despite my mother throwing tantrums herself, we waited until my daughter felt ready to let grandma back in. She was able to mourn and heal in peace. Thank you to everyone who expressed concern. 3. Second edit. Yep, she was high and drunk a lot of the time. This didn't faze me much because my parents have always used drugs and have had an impressively high tolerance. I grew up thinking this was normal. I absolutely understand now it is not, of course. The new guy is deeply religious. He has the occasional beer and smokes a little bud, but he got my mom off the crack and other hard stuff. I'm sorry to hear that. I know the sense of loss never really goes away. It's like grief is a big ball inside a box with a button linked directly to your pain. The ball rolls around all day and keeps hitting that pain button. Over time, the ball gets smaller and smaller, so it hits the button less often. Still, anytime it hits that button, it hurts just as bad as any time before. This idea really helped me. I would feel guilty for still getting sad, but reminding myself it's okay to still grieve even years later. It happens less often, and that's all we can ask for. He thought because he forced a yes out of me, he was absolved of the rape. He doesn't understand that coercion meant that my yes wasn't consent. He also didn't care that I said no dozens of times beforehand. His perspective was that because I said yes, other people were twisting my memories to make me the victim of a crime he didn't commit. That never happened. That man used to be a cop. That fact absolutely terrifies me. The distorted stories he told me before make me think that he's done this to other women before. He's convinced that because there wasn't enough evidence to bring him to trial, that it absolves him. Those who commit such harmful actions often have a distorted view of reality. I'm not sure why. So that they can live with themselves, maybe? Boo it. It was 2 months before she got with a new guy, and she was with your daughter throughout, and you also said your dad overdosed from crack. Your daughter should barely know her grandparents if they were / are using drugs like that, or is it just me? You did say you grew up around that, so I can assume it took time to realize your parents' errors and move past them to better yours and your kids' lives. That's what struck me as odd. I have no kids, but I used to teach preschool for 3 years and this would have been a major concern. Around 2012 or 13 my great-grandmother passed away. I was so distraught that I ended up not going to school that day. I remember a story my mom used to tell me about how, when I was a baby my great-grandmother was watching me, and I started to cry. No matter what she did she couldn't get me to calm down, so she in turn herself started to cry. I always think back on this and start to cry thinking how could I have been a better great-grandkid to not have done that to her. So 7 or 8 years later I still cry and mourn a little bit wishing she was here. Point of this is 2 months is definitely not long enough to stop mourning. No one ever really stops, and I'm glad your daughter and you are doing great. This breaks my heart. It wasn't your fault. She cried because she just loved you so much and wanted to be the best great-grandma. I shared this in a previous comment, but I can tell you too. Grief is like a big ball inside a box that has a button directly linked to your pain. That ball bounces around all day long and keeps hitting that button over and over, causing you to break again and again. Over time, that ball starts to shrink little by little. So now, it hurts just as much whenever it hits that button, but it hits the button less and less. Your mom point is a known crack addict and alcoholic. Why does your daughter even see this person still? If you're being serious with your post, then you should stop sending her around someone who abuses substances, and therefore your daughter too. Look, it stings to do that, but I had to cut out my own toxic sister from my daughter. She was in the room when I had my child. They were close, but someone who is an abuser will always find someone or something to abuse. That doesn't always mean cruel abuse, but abuse of any kind should not be tolerated with your kid. We did for a long while. Ultimately, I left it up to my daughter to tell me if/when she ever felt ready to invite grandma back into her life and get to know the new guy. We went almost a year with no contact. My daughter wanted to see her again, and she said she felt ready. We talked it over for a long time, but we conceded to having dinner with them. Things are actually pretty okay now. I don't have a relationship with my mother anymore. She only calls to see the kids, but she knows I will not hesitate to enforce a boundary. She got married to the new guy before the year was out, and he turned out to be a pretty decent guy. Never had kids of his own, but he loves having grandkids to entertain. Honestly, if they were to get a divorce, I'd be more apt to take the kids to see him than to see my mother. Damn, that was a wild ride. On a lighter note, I also called my grandpa Pop, and it reminds me a lot of my own mother and grandma. My dad died about 2 years before my grandfather, and my grandma always had pissing contests with my mom to see who was hurt more by their husband's death, always started by my entitled grandma. But reading through the comments, I'm glad she was able to get counseling and was able to heal from her first big family loss. I didn't take mine so well, but I got the help I needed. You're a good parent for sticking up for your daughter. I get the feeling my biological relatives will try to pull this shit when my grandparents pass. They've done nothing but suck the life out of them. I don't think they'll be alive when I turn 18, and I blame them. My papa and nana were in good health 10 years ago. Then comes their daughter, and she gets in an accident and the nurses pressure them into taking her, and they already had her son who she severely abused. With each passing month, I saw them lose life. They went from being able to run after 2 4-year-olds to barely being able to hold a 14-month-old little girl. She was my little sister that we hadn't adopted yet, but they adored her all the same, accepting her as a granddaughter as they did with my other siblings who weren't even biologically related or legally related to them. My nana used to make us cakes for our birthdays, but she had to stop a few years ago because she could no longer cook. I hate my relatives. Oh my god. She reminds me of my grandmother. She pulled that same shit with me when my grandfather passed away. He was the only father figure I had up until he died, and she was all I was married to him for 40 years. Which I would always counter and say he was my only father figure. I get it. They grieve, but they don't realize the effect it has on the grandkids who literally know them for their entire lives. How do you know she didn't influence your dad to what? If she's gonna be lime has my husband him sadder, then why she magically get over it in 2 months to date new person? I feel you're better off not being involved with your mother. She seemed to mentally and emotionally abuse all around her.